The 3 Ds by Ogden Nash. Read for you by Huw Carr. Victoria was an attractive new girl at the Mrs. Mallison's female seminary. Such an attractive new girl indeed that it is a pity she never grew to be an old girl. Perhaps she would have, if the Mrs. Mallison had established their seminary a little closer to Newburyport, or at least a little farther from Salem. Victoria was good enough, and not too good at lessons. Her mouth was wide enough to console the homely girls, and her eyes bright enough to include her among the pretty ones. She could weep over the death of a horse in a story, and remain composed at the death of an aunt in the hospital. She would rather eat between meals than at them. She wrote to her parents once a week if in need of anything, and she truly meant to do the right thing, only so often the wrong thing was easier. In short, Victoria was an ideal candidate for the 3 Ds, that night-blooming sorority which had, like the Sirius, flourished after dark for many years, unscented by the precise noses of the Mrs. Mallison. So felt the 3 Ds, so felt Victoria, and the only obstacle to her admission lay in the very title of the club itself, which members knew signified that none could gain entrance without the accomplishment of a feat daring, deadly, and done never before. Victoria was competent at daring feats, unsurpassable at deadly feats, but where was she to discover a feat done never before? Of the present membership, Amanda had leaped into a cold bath with her clothes on. Miranda had climbed on the roof in her nightgown to drop a garter snake down the Mrs. Mallison's chimney. Amelia had eaten cold spaghetti blindfolded, thinking it was worms, and Cordelia had eaten worms blindfolded, thinking they were cold spaghetti. What was left for Victoria? It was Amanda who, at a meeting of the steering committee, wiped the fudge from her fingers on the inside of her dressing gown and spoke the name of Eliza Catspur.
"Who is she?"
asked Miranda, pouring honey on a slice of coconut cake.
"A witch,"
said Amanda.
"She was burned,"
said Amelia.
"hanged,"
said Cordelia.
"and she couldn't get into the churchyard. So they buried her in the meadow behind the old slaughterhouse,"
said Amanda.
"The gravestone is still there,"
said Amelia.
"Oh, bother, the cake's all gone." "Never mind, I'll eat caramels. There's writing on it, too,"
said Cordelia, who was not hungry.
"But you can't read it in the daytime, only by moonlight." "I'd forgotten how good currant jelly is on marshmallows,"
said Amanda.
"The 3 Ds must tell Victoria about Eliza Catspur."
Late next evening, Victoria took her pen in hand.
"Dear Father and Mother, I hope you are well. I am doing well in algebra, but Miss Hattie is unfair about my French irregular verbs. I am doing well in grammar, but Miss Metty has chosen me to pick on. Dear Father, everybody else's father sends them $1 every week. I have lots of things to write, but the bell is ringing for supper. Lots of love, your loving daughter, Victoria."
Victoria knew that in 10 minutes Miss Hattie Mallison would open the door slightly, peer at the bed, murmur, "Good night, Victoria, sweet dreams," and disappear. It took Victoria 7 minutes to construct a dummy out of a mop, a nightgown, and several pillows and blankets. As she lowered herself to the ground, she heard the door open, heard Miss Hattie's murmur, heard the door close. The soaring moon ran through Victoria as she marched, as she skipped, as she pranced towards the old slaughterhouse. She had for company her high moon spirits and her long shadow, a shadow which was a Victoria that no Miss Malleson could ever cage.
No girl has ever had a taller, livelier companion than my shadow,
thought Victoria, and she breathed deeply and spread her arms, and her shadow breathed with her and spread crooked arms up the walls and across the roof of the slaughterhouse. The moon grew brighter with each burr that Victoria struggled against on her way across the meadow that had been abandoned to burrs. The meadow where no beasts fed. The meadow where Victoria's shadow strengthened at each proud and adventurous step. Where the burrs grew thickest, where her loyalty to the 3 Ds wore the thinnest, she came upon the gravestone. How hard the moon shone as Victoria leaned against the crooked slab, perhaps to catch her breath, perhaps to stand on one foot and pluck the burrs off. When the stone quivered and rocked behind her, and the ground trembled beneath her feet, she bravely remembered her purpose, that at midnight, in the moonlight, she was to prove herself a worthy companion of Amanda and Miranda, Amelia and Cordelia. Unwillingly she turned, and willfully she read the lines which the rays of the moon lifted from the stone so obscured by rain and moss. Here waits Eliza Catspur. Who touches this stone on moonlight meadow shall live no longer than his shadow. The job of memorizing was done, the initiation into the 3 Ds handsomely undergone.
Gracious, is that all there is to it?
Thought Victoria, and set out for the seminary. It was natural that she should hurry, so perhaps it was natural that she did not miss the exuberant shadow which should have escorted her home. The moon was bright behind Victoria. Who can tell how she forgot that there should have been a shadow to lead the way? But there was no shadow. Her shadow had dwindled as she ran, as though Victoria grew shorter, or perhaps the moon grew more remote. And if she did not miss her shadow, neither did she hear or see, whatever it may have been, that rustled and scuttled past her and ahead of her.
I hope my dear little dummy is still there,
thought Victoria as she climbed through the window.
I hope Miss Hattie hasn't been unfair and shaken me.
She tiptoed across the room in the dark to the bed and bent to remove the dummy. But as she reached down, the dummy, which was no longer a dummy, reached up its dusty fingers first. Next time on the Black Dog Chronicles, we must go back to where it all began. began with the terrifying tale that spawned what would come to be known as the Cthulhu mythos. H.P. Lovecraft's Dagon. Next time on the Black Dog Chronicles. Whatever you do, don't you dare miss it.